Hey everyone, it's Dylan with SeaTee Aquatics, and today we're talking about lighting. So why is lighting so important in our reef tanks? Simply put, lighting is so important because coral is photosynthetic. What that means is coral requires light to survive. Now, if you don't have any coral in your tank or don't plan to have coral, you don't need to have any special light. Actually, you don't need to have any light at all. In that case, the light would be more so that you can see your fish and other inhabitants. But in our case, we do plan to grow coral, and therefore, the lighting is super important. As mentioned in previous videos, coral has a symbiotic relationship with a type of algae called zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae is a photosynthetic organism, meaning that it absorbs light to help make energy. With that being said, the light that we choose for our tank is super important in helping to maintain happy and healthy coral. There are 4 key factors to look at when deciding on the lighting for your reef tank. Those 4 factors are the spectrum, the intensity, the coverage, and your lighting schedule. So let's start with color spectrum. Coral mostly use blue and violet light spectrums, especially when you're trying to get more glow or highlighter type colors in your coral. Having a lot of blues is super important in maintaining coral health, mostly because it helps with color. But coral also uses more than just blue, so it is essential to have a mix of multiple different colors of LED. So it is important to have a good spectrum, not just blue and violet, but also to have small amounts of green, red, yellow, and white. Personally, I like when my tanks have more of a white look to them rather than being super blue all the time. But I do also like the way that coral looks under the blue glow. So personally, I have my tanks spectrum-wise go blue at both sunrise and sunset, and then during the peak intensity of the day, I increase the whites so that I get both spectrums and both color looks. But again, blue is always going to be your main color within the spectrum, regardless of whether you want it to look more white or more blue. There are many lights on the market that come with presets that allow you to choose a spectrum that is already suited for coral growth, some which are more blue, some which are more white, and some that do what I just mentioned I do for my tank, where you get a mix. It may be more blue in the morning, more white in the evening. You may get blue at sunrise and sunset, and white in the middle of the day, or vice versa. There are also lights like Kessel, where rather than dialing in each individual LED to get different spectrums, it is pre-tuned so that you can just turn a knob. That knob will go from a warmer white to an almost blue, and no matter where you set the knob, it will be in an effective range for your coral. The next important topic to talk about is light intensity. Intensity is important because if you don't have enough intensity or enough PAR, then your coral won't have enough light and they'll struggle to thrive. But on the other side, if you have light that's way too intense, you can easily burn out and kill your coral in a very short period of time. That is why getting the right intensity is so important. With different types of coral, they require different levels of light. Typically, but not always, soft coral require lower PARs, anywhere up to 75 PAR. LPS coral typically thrive in areas of 75 to 150 PAR, and SPS coral will typically thrive in 150 PAR and plus. So knowing your coral and knowing the light intensity is super important. That is where a device such as a PAR meter comes in handy. You can easily rent a PAR meter from a place like Bulk Reef Supply, or even your local fish store may have them. I know mine does. For a relatively low price, you can test all of your tanks once you have your lights set up, set the PAR, map out the areas of your tank, and write it down where the PAR is so that you know where to place your coral in the future. And then you can return the PAR meter either to Bulk Reef or your local fish store, wherever you may have rented it from, and it will save you from having to spend $500 or $600 on buying and owning a PAR meter. The third most important thing to talk about when it comes to lighting is coverage. This kind of goes back to the PAR meter map, but when you're doing this, and even if you're not doing this, typically the center of your tank is going to form more of a hot spot under the light than the edges. This is because most lights are kind of like a spotlight. Directly under the light is going to be the most intense light. And then as you spread out, the light gets dimmer. You can see this on a PAR meter. As you would notice, directly under the light, the numbers are higher, and then as you go closer to the edges of your tank, those numbers will decrease. This is why coverage is so important. Depending on the size of your tank and what light you get, the light may not have the coverage that you need. The edges of your tank may not get enough light to support coral, and therefore you would either need to supplement more light or keep the coral out of those areas of the tank. In my opinion, you can always add more lights, so it's never a bad idea to start with something on the cheaper end as long as you know that it will be sufficient for at least part of your tank. Personally, I like the AI primes for this reason, because each AI prime puck has 16 LEDs in it, it has a good spectrum, and depending on the type of coral you get, can cover a 2 foot by 2 foot area. But if you want to increase the intensity or go to a bigger tank, for example, all you have to do is buy a few more lights. If you compare these lights to their counterparts, such as the Hydra 32 or the Hydra 64, which is essentially multiple AI primes combined, the pricing is very comparable. So it makes it worth it, especially if you're on a tight budget, to start with those, as again, they're smaller lights, and as you upgrade your tank, you can always upgrade the lights. The final thing to consider when choosing and setting up lights is the lighting schedule. It's important to note that coral typically don't need more than 12 hours of light per day. And honestly, that's on the high side. The minimum that I would recommend is about 8 hours. So anywhere from 8 to 12 hours is going to be acceptable. In display areas, I typically run the tank lighting schedule to the schedule of which the tank will be viewed. What that means is, for example, in an office building that's open 8 to 5, I'll have the lights run from 8 to 5. That's a 9-hour period, which is more than enough. Now, I would not recommend running at peak intensity during that entire 8 to 12 hours, especially if you're running on the higher side, closer to 12 hours. What that means is if your lights have any options for ramp up or ramp down times, I would highly recommend keeping the lights dimmer in the morning and at night, having a point in the middle of the day where you reach peak intensity, and then coming back down. The reason for this is if you run at peak intensity all day long, you're going to more likely than not err on the side of danger, and you could potentially burn out the coral, just like you would if the light was too intense. So if you cannot adjust the intensity of the light, I would definitely recommend to go on the shorter time period and to try and keep the light a little bit further away from the tank to keep the intensity down. But in most cases, modern LEDs all come with the ability to ramp up and ramp down. So usually, most people will have that option. As I stated before, I like to keep my lights blue during sunrise and sunset, and then during the peak intensity, I tend to go with more white. So what that looks like is in the morning, the blue lights will come on. They ramp up to about 50% intensity. They stay there for a little while. Then, in the middle of the day, the lights will ramp up further with white, reaching the 100% intensity, which I don't think my light actually hits 100%, but it reaches 100% for my schedule at least. It runs at that for about 4 hours. Then it drops back down to the 50% intensity, running blue, and then finally will come off. When setting up a new light, I would personally recommend using any of the preset schedules that may be included in your lighting's program. The reason for this is trying to adjust each LED individually, which most companies will allow for on their lights at this point, ends up being more of a disaster than a problem solver. At this point in time, most lights that people would be investing in are going to be LEDs. And that is why this whole video I talked about LEDs. In the past, a lot of people have relied on T5 fluorescent lighting or metal halide. Both have their pros and cons, but at the end of the day, technology has favored the LEDs. They're much cheaper to produce, easier to maintain, and cause far fewer issues with fish tanks. With that being said, I've only ever used LEDs for my tanks, so I'm not going to speak on the other options. So there you go. Today, we've got to talk about lighting, how it affects coral, and how to choose the right light and how to get them set up. Hope you enjoyed what you saw, and remember, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications to join us on our journey through the sea. Or drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of the video. Thanks for watching.